Hey folks, my name is Xavier Harding and I'm on the marketing team of Mozilla Foundation where I help highlight cool people and cool stories happening around the organization. Today, we're talking about dating apps and racism and bias online. Finding a partner used to happen in a newspaper or coffee shops, or don't even know where it used to happen, but nowadays it happens online and in apps, which is good and bad. The good reasons are kind of obvious. The bad reasons, usually it comes with bugs and biases, and often those biases that us humans are used to. So here with me today to talk about all of this are two people. One is Apryl Williams. Apryl is a senior fellow of trustworthy AI here at Mozilla Foundation and professor at University of Michigan. Apryl is also the author of a new book called Not My Type, Automating Sexual Racism in Online Dating. Oof. And also Zoe MacDonald. Zoe is a colleague of mine, coworker, and is awesome. She's a content creator for Privacy Not Included. You probably have heard of Privacy Not Included. It's very popular. The latest Privacy Not Included guide is a guide to dating apps. And there's also AI bot stuff in there. But how are you both doing today?
Yeah, doing really well. Happy to be here.
Same,
Nice.
good.
That's good. Okay, so maybe we start with Zoe. So Privacy Not Included, usually you all review gadgets and gear and apps. What made you want to focus on dating apps another time?
Demand. So we reviewed dating apps in 2021, and since then they've been among our most popular products for obvious reasons. People have privacy concerns about these apps. But 2021, we started to feel like those reviews were getting a bit old, so we actually sunsetted them online. And the second that we did that, we started getting messages from our readers asking, like, please bring them back. So that's exactly what we're doing.
Very nice. Yeah, I remember it was very popular because I think it was I remember the first time sex toys were included in a Privacy Not Included guide. And as you could imagine, it was a very popular guide.
Yeah, actually, there are a couple of sex toys that still bring like a huge amount of traffic to Privacy Not Included every single month. So,
Wow.
yeah,
I can't say
in
I'm
the works.
surprised.
Yeah, I
So
actually assign
yeah.
that guide to my students for Valentine's Day when I'm teaching during the term.
Oh, I love that.
What is their reaction to that? What do they have to say?
I mean, they're a little shy, they don't really want to talk about it, but I always just include it as additional reading, and I just want them to explore it and think about it. So I don't make them talk about it in class, but I can tell that they're a little shook. They usually are like, how is this legal? How can they do that? So that's something we talk about a lot in my classes.
It's a little jarring. Yeah, outside of, being a professor, you've also written this book. I'm interested in hearing from you, April. We see how racism exists online and the tech that people create. How does that all apply to dating apps and online dating?
Yeah, so I like to think of it as really the racism that we have online, or sort of like the bias that we experience online, is not any different than the racism or the bias that we experience in other areas of life. I think it's just often amplified by algorithms. We see things that make us go, huh, or think twice about something and sort of say, why is it that maybe I'm seeing this person on the app? Or why am I only seeing these kinds of people? Or why do I seem to only match with these kinds of people? And I think lots of users of color have an idea or a hunch that they're maybe being siloed, or that they're only being shown to certain types of people. But that hunch is really sort of supported by data from a lot of the companies that we see, where we know that they do sort of use ethnicity or economic status or education as a data point for pairing. Um, or at least they claim to. So I think that it's really difficult because we can't necessarily see what's in their code, but we do know what our experience is. And so I'll just stop there for a second and see what your reaction to that is, Xavier.
Oh, no, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, a question I have in my mind as you say that is we've had dating apps for kind of a while now. I can't even place a date on it. I feel like at least, I think Tinder came out like 10, 11 years ago. Um, my question is, what about this is different in 2024 or more recently? What about this is different lately?
That's a great question. I think when we had the sort of reawakening, the reckoning of 2020, where we had the convergence of the pandemic and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, or the movement for Black lives, people were really thinking about what it means to be anti-racist, or what it meant to participate in anti-Black racism and how to counter that in our society and how to move forward at that time. And we saw a lot of tech companies putting out these statements of alignment with BLM. Um, and so many of them were just statements, unfortunately. And this carried over with the dating apps market as well, where we saw people like Bumble and Tinder um, doing different statements of different extents. Some were definitely more anti-racist, and some were just sort of, it exists, and we're dealing with it in our own way. But after that shift, we saw a lot of the dating apps more deliberately address race and racism in their terms of use.
Mm.
But unfortunately, the implementation or the follow through on that hasn't been as productive for users as it could be. So I would say that now in 2024, dating apps are more aware that racial bias exists or that racial harm, racial harassment, racial fetishization is an issue in dating app culture. And they are creating statements that seem to address it. But to me, they don't feel as though they're doing the work that they should to protect users adequately.
Yeah, Zoe, I'm interested in your thoughts, when it comes to dating apps and how the harms that may exist. What about that is different lately in 2024 compared to before?
I think from a privacy perspective, there's two things that struck me looking at these dating apps in 2024. The first thing that's not necessarily new, but feels, at least to me, since the last time we reviewed them, has accelerated, is amalgamation. So
Mhm.
we made a huge effort to choose a diversity of apps, but even so, half of the apps out of 25 are owned by just two companies. So that's
Yeah,
Match
like
Group
Match
and
Group.
Spark Network. Exactly.
Yeah. Who's the second one? Sorry, I cut you off.
Spark Network, but Match Group owns something like 45 dating apps, like for niches you've maybe never even considered. But that raises some privacy concerns because that means that your information can be shared across, of course, to the parent company, but then also across all of those apps and used
Mm.
for advertising. It also raises an eyebrow when an app or when a company that owns Tinder also owns the anti-Tinder Hinge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. um, and then the other thing, especially from a privacy perspective, that has raised some concerns is the increased use of AI. So
Mm.
I've seen a lot of apps integrate that in a way that I think could be really innovative and interesting. But at the same time, what we're seeing with integrated AI in products is there's just not enough information about how the AI works or how that applies to your personal data and privacy. So that kind of comes along with its whole host of concerns as well.
Yeah. And I want to get back to AI in a second, but you said something earlier that was interesting to me. The idea that because Match Group owns Tinder and Hinge, is that something we see often where data that is collected about me on Hinge is used to power my Tinder uh, app? Like, uh,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. They don't get
wow.
super specific with how they share information, but we know that all of that information, all your personal information, can be shared across apps. And a lot of times it can also be used for targeted advertising. So, I mean, as a skeptic, I worry that they could use ads to just keep you kind of bouncing from one dating app to the other
To
within
keep
the
you single
match group.
forever.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be to their like corporate financial benefit as opposed to you
Yeah. I mean,
finding
Hinge
the
says
one.
designed to be deleted, but are they actually like designed to be deleted? Probably not, because it means less money for Hinge and Match.
We can't tell what they're designed to do. I
Right.
think that's the problem, but I'm skeptical of that claim for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to AI. So I want to kick it to April because I was reading your op-ed in Time recently, and you talked about how you met your husband, or I guess actually how your husband found you, and it had to do with being blonde. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we joke about a lot because he says that he's not into blonde women, and he kept seeing them. That was like something we talked about, I guess, when we were thinking through how I was launching the book, or maybe one night when I was writing the book. He sort of was like, I was always seeing them, even though I would swipe left, to indicate no. They would always still be there. And at the time, I did have blonde hair. And actually, just recently, he said that when I came on our date, he was surprised that I had blonde hair. So I guess he didn't remember, or I don't know. Maybe he was so taken that he didn't notice. But so the idea is that often the apps are using what they call a relevancy score, or a relevancy assessment. So they're looking for relevance between users. And the specifics about that are, again, sort of hidden. We can't necessarily tell what exactly they're doing, but we do know that to an extent, they're looking for cues in social context that would tell them that these two users would go together. I think often these apps are designed for white people by white people.
Hmm.
And so the things that they are maybe putting into the relevancy scores are part of the mass mainstream white Western ideal, right? So as my husband is a white man, they probably were pushing white blonde women to him because they thought that's what he desired. And he
Wow.
didn't have necessarily a checklist of yes, this, yes, that. Obviously, he was open to matching with blondes. It's not like he was saying, I never, ever would date someone who's blonde, but it just wasn't something that he was, I guess, looking for, right? But the idea that these apps sort of traffic in, I would say, is that the American Western ideal type is a blonde haired, blue eyed woman. And so to keep drawing users in, they're going to make sure that people that they believe want that have access to a steady stream of that ideal user.
Mm. You said something, was it called relevancy score? Is that the accurate? Okay. Well, you mentioned
Yeah.
that just now. When we talked last time, you kind of, I hadn't thought about this, but you mentioned how these companies have patents for things like this. Can you talk about the patents, and can you talk about if their priorities are actually even in the right place when it comes to these things that they're patenting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to offer sort of a note on patents. We know from reading a patent what a company intends to do, or sort of the general ethos about what is the desired outcome. But the thing about patents is that they are filed to protect an invention. And sometimes companies have ways of protecting themselves by using language that is kind of opaque on purpose, to make it hard to replicate a technology. And so because of that, I like to say that when you look at a patent, you can understand the driving desire of getting to a certain endpoint, even if we can't necessarily see all of the steps. So often they will lay out sort of a framework for why they are making a certain technology. And what I saw in one match group patent is that the relevance score does use items, or could use items such as weight, height, eye color, hair color, educational attainment, religious identity, to sort
Mm.
of assess how users might relate to one another.
Yeah. Zoe, I hope you could talk about privacy in relation to this. So, specifically weak points when it comes to the kind of various indicators. I think you mentioned an example to me recently about Grindr and location data and worries there. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I just want to say that I think one of the biggest risks with privacy in these dating apps is that because you're giving up this information to find a potential life partner, I think people are very willing to give up such a huge quantity of some very intimate personal information. And that
Mhm.
information then becomes kind of a risk and liability. Many of these apps have really extensive intro questionnaires. And even though they might say that filling in those questionnaires is optional, what they usually mean by that in the privacy policy is that your other option would be to just not use that app. Um, and those are, of course, involving questions around your ethnicity. Plenty of Fish has an intro survey that wants to know whether your parents are married or whether you own a
Hmm.
vehicle or whether you smoke. And
And you own a
OkCupid,
vehicle.
yeah,
Okay.
I I mean, I guess they feel that that's relevant. OkCupid also has some really interesting personality question surveys. I mean, you have to answer 15, but you can answer up to 500, and they include things like what your favorite Thanksgiving dish is, or if you sing along at concerts, or if you
What?
think, yeah, or if you think the sun, whether you think the sun or the earth is larger, which I also think is like a very could be a very personal piece of information.
Wow.
Um, oh, also, if you've ever asked to speak with a manager, that was another one that I
That is
took
a
note
question I
of.
need to know
That
the answer to, actually. That's a very important
yeah,
question. I see
I
why they
mean,
asked that.
for sure, and it might be really helpful for compatibility. And on one hand, we are looking for
Hmm.
apps that can help us relate to other people and find people who are truly compatible. But again, it's just a lot of personal information. And speaking of Grindr, if you are on Grindr, your HIV status is an
Hmm.
optional piece of information that you might put in your profile. There's also photos and coffee apps like Coffee Meets Bagel
Yeah.
and JDate. They collect your photos, but then they also collect metadata from your photos. So where they were taken, when they were taken.
Right.
I was just reading Christian Mingle's privacy policy that said that they also use third-party services to scan your photos to learn things, additional pieces of data about you. That's pretty intense. And then, every single thing that you do on the app also becomes another piece of data about you. Like who
Yeah.
you swipe left on is data, and who you DM and what you DM is also data.
Wow. I wish the show could just be like the best questions from those surveys of like, do you own a car? Do you sing at concerts? Do you ask for managers?
There's a lot of juicy ones in there that I think are really revealing. And yeah, good for match purposes, but as far as being privacy preserving, there are some concerns. So in the best case scenario, when you're giving up really personal information like that, it's not 100% secure if it's being transmitted over the internet. But
Yeah.
what we're finding with a lot of these apps is that they're so far from the best case scenario.
Hmm.
So they don't often meet our minimum security standards, which again is just the bare minimum for what they should be doing to protect that data. And I guess given that, it's not super surprising that many of them also have really terrible track records for
Yeah.
protecting that data. So, meaning in the past 3 years, they've had a major user breach or hack. And that brings us back to the question you asked about Grindr and their location data. So not last year, but in 2022, the Wall Street Journal reported that location information from Grindr was actually available for sale in the United States, and that some of that data might still be available for sale, like the historical data.
Hmm.
Um, and then recently, some Cyber News also reported that a very simple hack would make it possible to track OkCupid users' exact location.
Wow.
And they did patch that, but it's still worrisome that something like that can happen and put those app users at risk. Um, and when your information is exposed, there's a question of who's accountable for that. There was another story recently with Zeus, where they had a massive data breach that impacted millions of users.
Hmm.
And one of their users tried to sue them for damages. And they basically said that they had forfeited their right to do a class action suit in the terms and conditions.
Wow. Yeah, and I feel like for privacy not included, you all spend a lot of time reading terms and conditions. And you mentioned before about the idea of like a best case scenario, where usually it's not best case scenario. It's kind of like patents where it seems like I think this is something you were telling me recently, where they may mention something just in case they either because they're doing it or because they one day want to be able to do it. And there's no way for us to know but maybe you just have to assume that they are because it just feels murky and not user friendly. It feels user hostile.
Absolutely. Also, we barely, like, nobody reads the terms and conditions. We barely read them. We just started reading them to better understand AI products, but
Hmm.
they're so confusing and they're even worse than privacy policies. So I think the expectation that dating app users have not only read but agreed to those terms is ridiculous.
Yeah, I have more thoughts about just this idea of like terms of conditions and like you have to agree or you don't get to use the thing. But I want to shift gears to trust and safety because I think April, you were saying you have a lot of thoughts about like trust and safety with these apps and who it's designed for in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So in chapter 5 of my book, I actually talk about this. The chapter is called Safety Thirst. And it's because there is this, yeah, there is a thirst for safety. Really, trust and safety is designed and caters to and centers around protecting white women. And even the best that we have seen with trust and safety still fails to adequately protect white women. So if it is failing to protect the target demographic, then I don't really even like to think about how it's failing the rest of us, folks of color, queer users of color, trans users. It just really falls short. And I was actually reviewing some trust and safety policies this morning, or statements on different pages. And it looks like what a lot of companies are doing is putting the onus on the user. And I think that that is really unfair. Because yes, you're taking the risk. Everything in life is a risk, right? But you're taking a risk. But I think that users have an expectation that there is a limited amount of risk and that if they are to run into trouble, the platform is going to help them out. And just when I was looking this morning, like I was saying earlier, companies have started to include race and transphobia sort of in their protection of community guides of this won't be tolerated. But there's not a clear outline for how people would report, a transphobic incident or an incident of racial harassment, an incident of racial fetishization. And by not having a clear path for that, it really, I would say, disencourages users from reporting those kinds of moments of anxiety or stress or fear because they don't know that they're actually going to be supported. So that's a huge failing for me.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because it feels like a failing on multiple ends. On one end, you have your white husband who's only being shown blondes. And then on the other end, if you're a black woman joining the service, it's like, oh, are you running into trouble? Too bad. We're designers for white women, and we're not even protecting the white women when we design it for the white women. It just feels like a losing scenario. Like it just feels like probably frustrating.
Definitely, absolutely. And I would say too, when I was looking, Match Group has an advisory board for trust and safety specifically, and all of the organizations that were represented by members on the advisory board were women's and children's health, sex trafficking, and those things are important, obviously. I really do value those services, but at the same time, there wasn't any representation, at least that I saw, from people who were specifically working on trans safety or specifically working on safety for people of color, for women of color. And of course, that's just Match Group. I know there are some companies like her who really do value protection for users of color, for queer users, for trans users. And we need to see more of that kind of model where they're not just relying on these outdated community guidelines to protect users, but they actually have a team of moderators who are working to respond when there are certain incidents of harassment or frustration or violence that happens off of the apps even.
Yeah. And so I want to know what scares you about all this because on the one hand, you have terms of service agreements where it's like, hey, we can do a lot of stuff. Who knows if we're doing it? On the other hand, you have trust and safety regulations and rules that are just not cutting it. When you hear all this, what do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear what you're saying, April, because I feel like there's a very similar analogy with privacy in that the onus is so placed on the user. And we've seen a lot of privacy policies that say things like, when they're dealing with particularly sensitive information, they say, well, just having you given us that piece of information, you hereby grant us, the ability to do X, Y, Z with it. And then, of course, this is written in a document that probably nobody will ever read, which is the privacy policy. And the other thing, about these privacy policies saying they can do this, they may do that, that's just the shy, coy language of a privacy policy. Like they will always say can and may. It's not as if they have a separate set of language for things that they definitely will do. So when we see things like we can do this, we may do that, we have to take that very seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to mention for folks watching that we are taking questions. So if you have questions, drop them in the chat. Our producers will send them my way. No bad questions, only good ones, quality ones. But yeah, we are taking questions. Okay, so I asked Silly what scares you. April, I want to talk about what scares you. I want to talk about we were talking before about all the data points that these apps collect on you. And I actually didn't realize this, but you informed me that you can download your data on Tinder. Tell me about that and like what aspects of that data download maybe kind of wig you out.
Yeah, absolutely. I checked just this morning to make sure that it was still an option, and it is. So you can request your data from Tinder. And I encourage everybody watching to do that if you're using these platforms. I know for sure it can be done on Tinder. It's probably the case that you can do it on other platforms as well. But request your data and actually go through the rather arduous process of downloading it. And one of the things that wigs me out about it is that it is a process. You can't just go, or at least when I did it, which was a few years ago, admittedly, so maybe they've changed it. But you can't just go to Tinder via your mobile device and say, download all my data. You
Mm,
have to log in through a desktop, or I had to log in through a desktop and enabled device and request the data. Then it takes them a few days to send it to you. And then once they send it to you, you have 24 hours to download it. And if you don't do it within the 24 hours, you have to do it again. So you have to go through the whole process of requesting it again. When you finally get your data, or at least the items that I saw when I downloaded my data were that they had every picture that I currently had up on the site. They had all of the matches that I had in my match deck. So it didn't show deleted matches, but any sort of conversations that I had that were sort of just left. You all know how it goes. Like you just move on, right? I had about 1,400 conversations in that data set, and it had shown a lot, right? Every message that I had sent, it was there from the user and also from me. They did remove the data from the user, so it doesn't say like the person's name. It says
mhm.
user number XYZ. But it's a lot of data. So I would say if you have time, you should definitely check into it and then think about what that means for your privacy. What does it mean that they have all of this data readily available on you? What might they be doing with the data? Whose hands does it go into if they're data sharing across different platforms, which we know that they do? Really just think about that and think about how you're curating your profile and the kinds of information that you're sharing about yourself. For me, it's really scary to think that, they might be doing facial recognition scanning of our pictures. Some people put pictures up with their niece, their nephew, with their kids. Do we want data out there of the little people in our lives,
Mm.
where their faces are being scanned, or who knows what's happening with those images once they're up there? That part really scares me. And just the idea that they have this huge ongoing data accumulation of users that people might not be aware about is really, it's a little distressing.
It is. I love that advice you give of getting people to be proactive about downloading their data. And also, I would say that advice applies to so many apps. Like you should download your Facebook data and see all the things that is included in there. You should download as much data about yourself as possible from all these services that you use and just poke around and see, what data these companies have on you and then assess how do you feel about that? Are you good with that? Okay, so there's a topic I want to bring up and there's no segue for it. I just have to just go for it. It's about AI chatbot girlfriends. And this is research that Zoe is doing, and it's crazy what is happening out there. There's no segue. I just have to kick it to Zoe to talk about AI chatbot girlfriends.
AI chatbot girlfriends are a thing, in case you didn't know. And if you don't know what they're like, it's sort of like having a girlfriend that you can text with, but it's instead of being a human, those responses are generated by AI. And when we were chatting about this earlier, April asked me if it was kind of like the movie Her. And I really want to have the optimism of someone who just watched the movie Her, but unfortunately, myself and the Privacy Not Included team are coming from the trenches of these very sketchy websites, privacy policies, and terms and conditions. So it's not very much like that, but yeah, I wish it was.
And they're even like marketed like, hey, talk to this fake girlfriend however you want. Like, don't want to yell at someone in person in real life, yell at your AI girlfriend. Is that accurate?
Sometimes, I mean, I have seen some things that have disturbed me, and I think that it's similar to what April was saying earlier about how we have these real life problems relating to each other, like misogyny, for example, and then we see in the way that the AI chatbots are positioned, marketed, and even how they describe the characters, that those real life biases are definitely being copy pasted into AI as well. And I'm not sure if it's based on real information that they're finding in research or a perception of like what is wanted, but either way, it's not representing the most
What?
if
What are you thinking right
I'm
now? What's
not
on your
sure.
mind?
Yeah, I don't know how to properly complete that thought. But basically, okay, so looking at what they're marketing for, it doesn't seem like they think very highly of the people who might be consuming these in some cases.
Interesting.
In my
Interesting.
opinion, yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, Jen is the leader of Privacy Not Included.
Jen Cartwriter.
Jen Colwriter, of course, said that in one of the apps that she reviewed, that they were boasting about how you can be a brutal boyfriend to your AI girlfriend.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
not really one of the hope that we hope for with AI relationships.
AI relationships. I never thought I would heard that phrase, but here we are. Okay, so it seems like these kinds of apps are actually like very popular. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it feels like whenever there's an AI app store that becomes available, AI chatbot girlfriends are like the category to shoot to the top. If this is becoming a thing, what things do we want to make sure we add to this space? And what things do we want to make sure we don't want to add to this space, if that makes sense? Maybe I'll start with Zoe and then kick it to April.
Yeah, great question. I'd like to see two things. I'd like to see less risk and more reward
Hmm.
for users. I mean, by less risk, I mean a lot more transparency about how the AI works, how your data will be used, more power on the users to be able to control and understand both their data and the AI, better security, more respect for users' privacy overall, I think, like opt in if you want your messages being used for AI training, but as opposed to opt out or not even knowing whether they are being used for that training. And by better reward, I think that what we're seeing, especially in the fine print of those nasty terms and conditions documents, is that there's such a big gulf between what these apps are promising that they might do for you and what they're actually doing for you. So, for example, many of these apps are marketed as being like beneficial to your mental health. But then when you read the terms and conditions, they're like, this is absolutely in no way a mental health product. Like, do not trust the chatbot. They might lie, they might be mean, they might be nasty. And um, I think that's really setting up users for failure.
Mm.
So less of that
Yeah,
and more rewarding experience and then more privacy protections.
got it. And April, when you think about AI chatbot girlfriends, what do you want to see come to that burgeoning space?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. When you said that, I was like, what are the big things? Because there's so many things that I would want for this kind of space. And for me, the biggest thing is transparency with users about where the data is coming from. So is your chatbot partner um, animated by data that is mostly from users of color, right? Or from user data sources produced by people of color? Is it animated by data sources that are produced by white folks, by, low wage gig workers, right? Like, where's the data coming from that animates the chatbot partner? For me, that's really scary that it's an unknown
Mm.
and might be an avenue for exploitation, right? Like we just don't really know. So I think often people think that the chatbot is an AI, so it's equitable or fair in a way because there's no quote unquote no human labor involved. But we know that there actually is so much human labor involved in animating AI chatbots. And the other piece too that sort of goes along with this, more of what I would want to see is just more space for dialogue with users. Where if people are saying, I don't like this experience, or I don't like that there's not transparency, that companies would actually be responsive to them and actually have some kind of accountability measure. Okay, you don't like this, we're going to change it. Or you
Mhm.
want to know where this data comes from, we're going to tell you, and in accessible language, not language that is more of the confusing sort of terms of service type language that people don't read.
Yeah, it just feels user hostile. Okay, so we have audience questions coming in, and the first one is on AI chatbot girlfriends. And it's about the intersections that might be happening. Are there incel and girlfriend chatbot intersections happening? Zoe, maybe I could get that to you. Like, what kind of intersections are we seeing with the types of communities that may gravitate towards AI chatbot girlfriends?
What I can say about that is our sorry, our privacy researcher, Misha, downloads all of the apps for research. And as a result, we also get an insight into the app's targeted ads often.
Mhm.
And based on what we've observed from those targeted ads, they are definitely trying to target lonely males who may have difficulty with in-person relationships. So whether that intersects with the incel community, it sounds like it might.
Yeah, that's a good point. We have another question. This one is not about AI chatbot girlfriends. It's for April. April, in Brazil, we are having, it's from Tarcisio. April, in Brazil, we are having a very controversial debate in Brazil around how to categorize risk levels of AI applications if our regulation go to the risk-based framework like EU. Higher risk categories would be liable to more transparency, responsibilities, and enforcement. Where do dating apps AI capabilities, where are they? Do you think it should be categorized as low risk, high risk?
Yeah, I think that's such a tough question, because there's sort of like the public perception of risk and the stuff that lawmakers will buy into as what is seen as risky. And the things that they see as risky are things that are sort of risky to like personal health and personal safety, right? Personal harm. But I think what needs to happen is a shift in the way that we are even thinking about safety. If people are to be truly safe, that has to also include their mental health, that has to also include their digital safety, right? So for me, I would say that dating apps are relatively high risk because they get to the very heart of how people see themselves and how they interact with other humans. And
Mhm.
if your mental health is always taking a hit because you're having these terrible experiences where you're being fetishized online, or you're not sure about the safety of your data, maybe there are deep fakes being created or your
Wow.
nudes are being leaked, right? Like all of these different things that get to the heart of our mental health and our mental well-being. I would say that using a dating app is a high risk activity if you're thinking about safety as more than just risk to immediate physical safety.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so I think my final question can go off of that. So, what do you recommend for folks when it comes through moving through these online dating space worlds? what do you recommend when it comes to protecting their privacy online and also protecting their mental health? Um, yeah, go ahead, April.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing, it seems sort of like the easy thing to say because we always say it, but really we have to be more vocal about what these apps are doing, especially when it comes to with our lawmakers. Right now, I feel like there's a big focus on generative AI and chatbots, ChatGPT. But the same technology that animates generative AI is the same technology that we see in so many aspects of our everyday lives. It doesn't have to be a focus on dating apps, but if we're talking about self-driving cars or even regular cars that are using driver monitoring systems to make sure that you're kept safe, what is the trade-off, though, of us doing that? Are police going to be able to come in and surveil us more thoroughly because they're now inside of our cars too?
Wow.
All of these tech systems are connected to each other, so we really do have to be advocating for more privacy, and just more visibility of how these systems are being used when they're outside of our control. Where dating apps are concerned, I would say that you should be really careful about the kinds of things that you're putting in your profile, because we know that they are accessible and that your data can be easily exported. And when I say careful, I mean careful as in cautious, but also making sure that you are constructing your profile with care in terms of people who are looking for partners, whether that is like a just for fun partner, a long-term partner, a friend partner, whatever it is. Be specific about what you put in your profile, mean what you are saying, because I really do strongly believe that when you put good energy out, you get that same energy back in. And it's a way of safeguarding yourself and saying, okay, this is what I'm looking for, and I have this standard. And as you're swiping and going through, look at people's profile. I know that it's tempting to just swipe really quickly and have fun, but look and see who are the people that you're matching with. Do you feel a good vibe, right? I think that, and this is maybe a little bit more woo-woo than we're doing right now. But I do think that you can sort of get a feel for who a person is just by looking. And if it's a bad vibe, it seems too risky for me. So I'll stop there because I could go on about how to do dating for a long time. But
Yeah, no,
anyway,
that's some good evergreen advice just in life in general. Bad vibe, just kind of steer clear. Okay,
yeah.
so Zoe, when it comes to protecting your privacy online, when it comes to protecting your mental health online when moving through these dating app spaces, what do you say to people?
First of all, I totally agree with everything that April said. I think it's really important to advocate for more privacy protections for everyone all the time. And, like we talked about earlier, there's just way too much onus put on the individual. I also agree about the vibes question. And what I would suggest, April mentioned the same thing, but basically just proceed with caution when you're giving away this information, with the understanding that once you give it up, you almost always lose complete control over it. And that can be really scary. So, one of the things that I can recommend to kind of mitigate that is read the reviews on Privacy Not Included, have a look at our safety tips. There are things that you can do to preserve a little bit more of your privacy with these apps. And from the mental health perspective, I think I would also suggest, like whether it's dating apps or AI relationship chatbots, to just make sure that you're keeping some real humans in the mix that you
Hmm.
know and that you can trust.
This is where we're at nowadays. We have AI chatbot girlfriends. We have to remind people to have real people in their lives. Okay, so a question just came in, even though we're doing this outro. I want to service it right now. So I'd be curious about your thoughts. This is what the question says. I'd be curious about your thoughts on the broader implications of having to pay the apps for higher quality matches. Just to give an example, anecdotally, people of color acknowledge that potential matches of color are often hidden behind a Hinge standouts type of paywall, mirroring the ideas April brought up about how the companies think racial dynamics should work in the dating market. But given the effects of these paywalls, they'll interact differently from especially marginalized groups. Is there something here about the disparate impact of these policies that should be considered more of a legal liability for the companies?
So you would think so, right? I would definitely think that putting a certain subset of users or access to a certain subset of users behind a paywall would be classified as some sort of discrimination. I'm not a lawyer, so don't quote me on that, but that's my gut feeling. Um, and also just the idea of having to pay for quote unquote higher quality matches in general sort of weirds me out because what does it mean to be a higher quality match? What is the basis of that? Does that mean that we're talking about people who have a more complete profile? Because that I can get behind, right? Allowing users to make more informed choices about who they're matching with. But if better means more attractive or a more highly rated by others user, then I think we have to really sort of pump the brakes on what better means. Just because other people interact with someone more often, and so therefore they're a more active user, or because they fit within the sort of Western ideal attractiveness schema, doesn't necessarily mean that they're a better match. So I think that we just have to use caution around what we mean by better, but certainly paying for better matches sort of rings alarm bells for me. And I don't mean that to say that users shouldn't. I think that users should advocate for themselves in the best way that they are equipped to do. And if that means paying for matches or paying for an ability to interact with different people, and you have to do that, you absolutely should do that. But I think that the companies should rethink how they're framing having people pay for matches, especially if it's true that matches of color or better or a bigger variety of matches with folks of color is hidden behind a paywall. That seems like a bad practice to me.
Are folks not tired? Can we just go back to meeting people in person with like a coffee shop and like a meet cute in real life? It's not a real question. I'm just saying that as a person. I'm just tired. Okay. Where can folks find you both online? April, where can folks find you and where can people find your book?
Yeah, so if you go to notmytype.info, there will be info about how to either message me, whether that is through email, and also links to buying the book. But also I am on X, I am on LinkedIn, and if you just Google me at the University of Michigan, you can find my email pretty easily.
Awesome. Thank you, April Williams. And Zoe, where can folks find you online if you want to be found online? Where can folks find Privacy Not Included?
I don't want to be found online, but you can find my work and the work by the Privacy Not Included team at privacynotIncluded.org. Our AI chatbot girlfriend reviews and boyfriends are live now, and the dating apps will be updated by the end of the month. So stay tuned for that one.
Okay. And I am findable online at I am Xavier on Twitter/X, Instagram, all that. But yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in today. Yeah, more chats to come in the future. So tune in next time. See you then.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.